This is the second of a series of videos explaining a little bit about the history of the Eucharist, communion, and why we do what we do. In the first video, I talked about the New Testament. In this second video, I'm going to talk a little bit about practice as we understand it in early Christianity. In that video, I emphasized the importance of St. Paul's account in 1 Corinthians 11. There's much more that I could say about that, but perhaps one of the most interesting questions around New Testament and early Christian practice is the relationship between the Eucharist and table fellowship. In fact, that question is at the heart of Paul's discussion of the Eucharist in 1 Corinthians. And if you think about it, that's not surprising because the first Eucharist occurred at a meal, according to the Synoptic Gospels, at a Passover meal. Now, Paul, like the Gospel of Luke, suggests a two-part observance of the Eucharist. Both report that Jesus gave bread to his disciples while they were eating supper, and both also say that after supper he took the cup. I wonder whether you've ever noticed that and whether you've wondered about its significance. In 1 Corinthians 11, Paul addresses some of the challenges presented by celebrating the Eucharist in the context of a common meal. And remember, early Christians worshiped in people's homes, not in churches, so they gathered, undoubtedly, around a table. Apparently, though, instead of what we're familiar with common meals in the Christian tradition, contemporary Christian tradition, as potlucks or covered dish dinners, in the community of Corinth to which Paul was writing, apparently people brought their own meals. And this led to division, as some, being wealthier, brought a great deal to eat, and others, being less wealthy or poor, had nothing to bring. And so Paul's advice in that chapter is that people should eat at home and then come to common worship. Now, we know that there's been a lasting appeal of seeing the Eucharist as a common meal. Some traditions, like the Moravians, have practiced this regularly. Other communities have centered their worship around a common meal and Eucharist. In fact, this practice has found new resonance in the 21st century. And with COVID and the restriction on large gatherings, it may be that we need to rethink how we might again worship, whether creating small worshiping communities in people's homes might be a way of moving forward until we are either able to gather together as a large group. As Christianity grew and eventually was tolerated, Christians would construct houses of worship, and Eucharistic practice would change accordingly. But it's actually quite remarkable how much of our liturgy derives from those early centuries of Christianity. Not just the words of institution, this is my body, this is my blood, but other words we say. For example, the Sursum Corda, the words that begin the Great Thanksgiving, the dialogue that begins with the presider saying, "Lift up your hearts," and other people replying, "We lift them up to the Lord," are recorded. Those words are recorded in 2nd and 3rd century texts. Other practices from early Christianity might strike us a bit more strangely. For example, from a fairly early date, at least in Rome and churches influenced by Rome, was the custom to allow only baptized Christians to be present for the Eucharist. While anyone could attend the beginning of the service, what was then and is now called the Liturgy of the Word, when it came time for the Eucharist, the Liturgy of the Table, all unbaptized people were escorted out of the assembly. In the second half of the 20th century, the liturgical renewal movement looked back on the early church as it sought to reinvigorate and transform Christian worship. Grace Church, this space and community, played a crucial role in that movement in the Episcopal Church. For many years, the chief organ for liturgical renewal in the Episcopal Church, the Associated Parishes for Liturgy and Mission, was headquartered right here at Grace Church. And we were one of the first churches to enact one of the trademarks of that movement, to relocate the main altar from off the wall away from the wall so that the celebrant could celebrate from behind the altar rather than facing the altar, which was the tradition. Now, in recent decades, much of the scholarship behind that movement has come into question, especially the claim that celebrating facing the people was the norm in the early church. We'll come back to that, hopefully, but in the next video, I will explore several key developments in Eucharistic theology and practice in the Middle Ages.